Hello, everybody. My name is Wisteria, as I said, and since this is Women's History Month for the month of March, we are doing Feminine and Fierce, looking at female pirate queens of the seven seas. And let me show right there, and I do have lots of notes because there's dates and things that I want to try to remember because there's a lot of interesting information, at least for things that we were able to find. And so as you're looking at this image here of the ocean, when you think about the ocean, and for those of you that are in the room here, you can help me out with this a bit. As you're looking at the screen of the ocean, and we were talking about the polar plunge there, but what are some things come to mind when you see this image on the screen?
I see nature.
Okay, you see nature. Anything else?
I see the battle of the ocean.
Ooh, that's a good one. The battle of ships on the ocean. Well, the ocean is, takes up most of our planet. But what's interesting when it comes to the ocean and women, there's a couple of things. And there's a couple of things that we sort of have in common. And let me know if you agree with this. So the first one, the ocean can be dangerous, yet beautiful. The sea is like a mother to a sailor. It is seen as the mother of all. It gives life to strange creatures, stories of mermaids, humans, and the gods, little g. The ocean is often referred to as a she. There are many myths about having women at sea or on a boat or a ship. Okay. Some of those things that I mentioned, like dangerous yet beautiful, can apply to women, and they definitely apply to some of the pirate queens that we're going to be talking about today. Now, in addition to just those pirate queens, and I mentioned about having gods on board, the little g when it comes to gods and goddesses, particularly when we think about the Greeks and Romans. And here on the screen, there are a couple of different goddesses that are going to play a key role in the ocean, whether it's navigation or with some of these pirate queens. So our first one here up at the top is going to be Glinda, and she is from the continent of Africa, and her husband was known as the moon, she being kind of the sky and the stars. Down below her, you have an image of Selene, who was from the Greek. She's got the moon on top of her head. Right next to her, you have Artemis or Diana, depending on if you're looking at Greek or Roman, who was the goddess of the hunt. Then you also have Yamaya down at the bottom, who was also, her name means mother of all creatures in the ocean. And she's part of the Yoruba tradition coming out of, Yoruba people, I should say, excuse me, out of Nigeria, and was also seen in the Caribbean. On the other side there, you're gonna have, that word there is, let's see, what is her name? That is Luna over the top, which is the Greek word for moon. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, we talked about the ocean and how it was dangerous, but you also see lots of paintings and things of women across time. And these are just a few of images that are from the collection at the Mariners Museum. So at the top here, you see again, ships are not just named for women, but even some of the figureheads that you would find out in the fronts of the ships would be mermaids, or it could be of someone's loved one, as you see this young woman at the top sitting for her portrait to be carved. You've got the mermaid right next to her. Again, another painting showing that ocean can be dangerous. And even more so, there are a number of shipwrecks, and there's been a number of shipwrecks throughout history that unfortunately did not have very good endings. But that's going to be the same thing said of some of these pirate queens. And when we think about pirates today, you always kind of think of the stereotypical image right here of how to be a real pirate. So from top to bottom, they're looking at the type of hat that they would have been wearing. that there would have been tobacco stains. There would have been body lice. Some pirates had a beard. Rings, jewelry, there's going to be scars. It says boozy breath on one side there. Looking at their clothing, peg leg, and their shoes. But then we can also turn to our movies and look at how particularly male pirates would have been shown. And of course, the woman that's going to be a part of piracy is always shown as the damsel in distress. So we've got things like Captain Blood, and you have double crossbones. And of course, we have Pirates of the Caribbean down at the bottom. But what about those pirate queens? A lot of them are going to take to the seas because one, it's the only thing that they could do at that time. Other things, they've lost a family member. Some of them go to piracy out of revenge, which we're going to talk about with a couple of those ladies. Some of them go out to sea because it's just for the adventure of it, mainly because women are told you can't do this. Well, many of these women are going to prove wrong. One of the women that I'm going to talk about as probably was one of the most successful pirates of all time. And notice I'm leaving off queen because we're talking about pirate overall. And this is according to historians and scholars, but we'll get to her story momentarily. Now, we do find female pirates in pop culture today. So you find them in a number of different movies. So up here at the top is the actress Gina Davis, who's in the movie Cutthroat Island. And Cutthroat Island right now is actually on a number of different streaming channels like Tubi right now, which is free. It is on my list to watch. But right next to her, actually down at the bottom here, we have Claire Paget, who was playing Anne Bonny in the TV show Black Sails. Then we have Jean Peters at the top there in black and white playing Anne of the Indies, which is a 1950s movie. We have Ava Green down here at the bottom, who was in the second 300 movie, which was called, what was that movie called? It was called 300 Rise of an Empire. And that was the maritime aspect of that. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. We have Keira Knightley as well as Zoe Saldana from Pirates of the Caribbean. And even video games are showing female pirates. And so this again is another rendering of Anne Bonny in a very popular game called Assassin's Creed. This one is Assassin's Creed's Black Flag. So definitely lets you know that we are talking about piracy. Now, there are a number of names of pirate queens that have come up over time, and some of these pirate queens have been very difficult to try to find the research for, because sometimes you just have a paragraph. Then there's other pirate queens that there's tons of information about. So the ones that I have highlighted are ones that we were able to find a good amount of information. And those are the ones that I'm going to try to share with you today. There are a couple that, again, it's part fantasy, part history, and then others we know because of court records that were well kept. So today we're going to try to get through some of these pirate queens. We have Elisa, we have Chen Isao, Grace OMalley, Artemisia the First, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who are always talked about in conjunction, Lady Killigrew, Queen Teka, Syeda Ahora, Serena Bobalena, and Jean de Clemson. And we're going to talk about all those. Again, keep in mind that many of these women throughout history were considered second-class citizens. So again, many of them went out for adventure. Some went out because it was the only other duty that they could do to provide for their families. Some went out for sheer revenge. But I also should mention that some of them would go out for patriotic reasons. Now, and I mentioned that there's a fine line, and I'm sure that you all have heard of the term privateer. Now, the fine line between a privateer and a pirate is what side of the law you're on. So for instance, if you were the Queen of Spain and I'm the Queen of France, and you and I are not getting along, you could send your sailors, your fleet out to attack my ships. Now, those sailors who are attacking under your flag would be considered privateers to you. But because they're stealing from me, I'm going to consider them as pirates, and vice versa. So there is a very, very, very fine line. And some pirates, whether male or female, rode that line. Sometimes they tilt it one way, sometimes they tilt it the opposite. So it just really depends on that particular person's story. And I'm going to try to share with you what we know. So the first pirate queen that we're going to talk about today, her name is Queen Elisa, but she was also known in history as Dido. And she was born around 879 BC in Tyre, Lebanon. We know that she did pass away, and we'll talk about that momentarily, but she was known as the founder of Carthage. Now, if we're thinking about Carthage, Carthage is actually going to be in parts of Africa. It's going to be the modern day area around Tunis, Tunisia, where ancient Carthage is. Other ways that you may have heard of ancient Carthage, I cannot say that word today. Ancient Carthage is, you may have heard of a man by the name of Hannibal, who in history actually took elephants over the Alps to defend his homeland. So same area that we're referring to. But her husband, actually was said to have been a pirate as well as her father. Her husband and her father, her brother actually took the life of her husband. We're not exactly sure why he did, but it was enough to make Dido flee. So she's going to leave Lebanon and eventually end up in Tunisia. And it was there that she's going to purchase a piece of land, and that land will eventually turn into the ancient kingdom of Carthage. And the city is going to prosper. She had lots of suitors who wanted to take her hand in marriage. She did not want to get married again. So she's actually going to run away. And depending on which historian or poet you are reading, they say that she constructed a funeral pyre on which she stabbed herself in front of her people because she did not want to get married. However, there is another author, his name is Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, and he changed the story just a tiny bit. And in his story, he made her fall in love with a man by the name of Aeneas, who was said to be the founder of Rome. And because he abandoned her, that was why she decided to take her own life. I think it's a little bit more romantic on that second way than the first, but they say that she laid a curse upon the Trojans, and that this particular curse is going to eventually lead to the Punic Wars that took place between Rome and Carthage. But sadly, she dies in 759 BC in Carthage, which she founded. And unfortunately, that's really the only information that we have about her. So she does have some ties to piracy, again, a little bit more on the patriotic side, if you will. Now, this woman right here, well, hers was a little bit of revenge. So this is Artemisia I of Halicarnassus, and there's actually two Artemisias. We've got the first one and we've got the second one. The second one is who most people know of. If you've ever heard of the mausoleum at the Halicarnassus, which she was going to be buried in. Her husband actually built that for her. And the mausoleum at Halicarnassus is the one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, because we do have the New World with that as well. Now for her, let's see. We do know that she had a very long career on the seas. We just don't know too much about her up until a certain point. Most of what we know about her is going to take place about 480 BC, and there's going to be something called the Battle of Salamis. Now, I mentioned the movie 300, Rise of an Empire. That was the second side of the original 300, where King Leonidas is at the Hot Gates. This is taking place at the same time or just a little bit after what happened there. And the Battle of Salamis is going to take place under King Xerxes, who is the king of the Persian Empire. And he felt that without having power over the Greeks, he wouldn't be able to take over any of the land that he wanted to. So not only is he going over the Greeks, he's particularly going after the Athenians. That's where he's heading, and he feels like a naval victory is going to secure that for him. So a couple of the ships that are going to be used in this battle, down at the bottom here is a miniature model that we have at the Mariners Museum. And this is a trireme, and we also have biremes. Now the difference is a bireme is going to have 2 rows of oars on both sides. A trireme is going to have 3 rows of oars. Now, the Battle of Salamis, the idea was to lure them into a trap. Keep in mind that these boats, or ships, if you will, are wooden. They're about 80 to 130 feet long. And then, of course, 2 or 3 rows of oars. The idea was to bring them into the Straits of Salamis, which is a very narrow corridor. So very similar to how the original one goes, where they're on land, the same idea is going to happen. Now, what's interesting for Artemisia, which is kind of unusual for the time period, is she was actually one of Xerxes' generals. So she's in charge of one of the vessels that is going to be headed into this gate. Now, she gave a warning to Xerxes that something was not right, and that she was trying to kind of talk him out of falling for this plan. He did not listen. The Persian ships were too large, and as they came into this narrow strait, they're being destroyed left and right. Now, she realizes this, and she tries to get her ship to move out of danger. But in order to get completely out of danger, she has to ram several of the ships. And in doing so, she actually sinks one of them. Now, Xerxes is watching from afar. He's watching this battle from a huge cliff. He is super excited because he sees a ship going down. The problem is he didn't realize it was one of his own. So Artemisia actually rammed one of her own people's vessels to try to get out of the way. And there's a little story, and still can't prove it just yet, but there's a little tiny story out there that she may have switched her sails to make it look like she was Greek to kind of get out of the way, and then raised it up at the last minute. Not sure about that, but we do know she hit a ship, it sank, and it was Xerxes' ship that did so, and he never realized that it was his ship. And so the advisors on shore led Xerxes to believe that she sunk an enemy ship. But that's where her story kind of ends. She was a woman of Greek descent, but she was working for Xerxes. So she's going to battle against the Greeks. We're not sure exactly what her issue was against the Greeks. The movie gives you one version of that, of what may have happened to her. They're not entirely sure, but we know that she just did not like the Greeks and took every opportunity. But unfortunately for Artemisia I, she kind of dies away in history. It's mentioned that she may have just after this battle took into land and may have become a caretaker for some of Xerxes' children, but she kind of fades away into history. Now we have Queen Teta of Illyria around circa 230 BC. Looking on the map here, Illyria is where you find a number of the Balkan. It's the Balkan Peninsula right across the Adriatic Sea there. And there is a Greek historian who wrote about the rise of the Roman Empire in a book called The Histories, and he credits Queen Teta with a number of the information that he gets. Now, we do know that Illyria was on the Dalmatian coast, and that was another name for the Balkan Peninsula, just across from Italy. The country really did not have any fixed borders at that time, and she's acting as regent for her son after the death of her husband. In order to provide for her people, she is going to take to the seas. And in her country, piracy was approved of by the monarchy, and it was a free enterprise. The only thing that she asked is she is going to take a certain percentage of whatever the pirates gathered. Once she got her percentage, then the rest could be divided out to everyone else. So you can imagine that piracy, if people can have a ship or a boat, they're going to head out to the seas. Now, because of this law, they made riches quite well. Illyria is going to become a very rich nation, very successful. She herself would sometimes go out to sea with her men, so much so that she earned the nickname, and her nickname was the Terror of the Adriatic. Now, when she got tired, she returned home. And she had a little issue with Rome. So she decided that she was going to attack their ships. And a couple of the ships that she attacked had goods, and she took 2 hostages aboard. 2 of the Roman officers tried to reason with her, and well, she just kind of ignored him. And she picked up her husband's campaign, who had been trying to fight against the Romans for quite a long time. And because she was interfering in the interests of the Romans, they did not take that lying down. They may have kind of let her slide on the radar, but attacking those 2 vessels was kind of like, okay, kind of a wake-up call. So in 229 BC, Rome declared war on Illyria, and they mobilized against her. They were able to control the area all around her. And her own governor is going to sell her out to the Romans. He also got part of her land as payment for doing so. So eventually she is going to surrender, and this was in 228 BC, which the Romans accepted. And sadly, this is another pirate queen that kind of dies away in history. She disappears. We do know that her son does ascend to the throne when he becomes of age, but her story just kind of ends right there. And that's the way how some of these stories go, even more so for some of the Scandinavian pirate queens we were able to find. One particular one, her name is Elwida, and she was born around circa 790 to about 1000 CE. And she was the daughter of Siward, who was the king of the Goths. Her name means to shine, gleam, to be a supernatural being, and in ancient Germanic, her name meant to battle or fight. Now, she was known to be very beautiful with lots of wealth, so much so that there were lots of suitors for her hand. Her father had picked out one that he liked quite well. She did not. So in order to not get married, she, along with some of her maidens, took to the seas, became pirates themselves. And the prince, his name was Prince Alf, chased after these pirates because he had heard all these stories. She had stolen a ship, took to the seas. She encountered a pirate ship that did not have a captain, so the crew elected her as their captain. So now she's got two vessels and is attacking the seas. Eventually, news gets out there back to the king that these pirates are hitting the Denmark seas, and he sends out this Prince Alf to attack these pirates. And imagine his surprise of who was actually attacking the coast. It was going to be Princess Elwida. Now remember, she ran away from an arranged marriage, but when he stepped aboard her ship and the crew was asked, where's their captain? They pointed to her and everybody was like, no, really, who's your captain? She is. So she was forced to take off. She was actually wearing a disguise on ship. She took it off to show who she was. And the moment she laid eyes on Prince Alf, she changed her tune. So we think, as there's not a description of him, but just from that little bit of information, perhaps he was someone who was very pleasing to the eye. Must have been pretty well because she eventually goes back to land, they get married, and they become the future king and queen of that. And again, that's kind of where her story is. This is also a Viking figurehead that we have at the Manners Museum on display. It's actually not on display right now, but it is the head of a dragon, which you do see a lot of on Viking ships. Now, I've got to tell you that some of the pirate queens that we do have a lot of information for, she happens to be one of my favorites. I'm actually going to be talking about several favorites towards the end here because we do have a lot of information, what we know of them. So this pirate queen here is Jeanne de Clemson, who was known as the Lioness of Brittany. She was born Jeanne de Belleville on the western coast of France. She got married at the age of 12 to a nobleman, and she had 2 children. He died in 1326. Several years later, she married her second husband. His name was Olivier de Clemson. 1330, had 5 more children. So as I share the story with you, keep in mind that this is a woman that's probably about 16, 17 years old, has 7 children, and has been married twice. Okay? And is with her second husband where things are going to take a turn for the worse. Now, there is a war that's called the War of Brighton Accession. And her husband, Olivier, has a friend by the name of Charles du Bois who wants to claim the land, and Olivier decides to back him. Now, Du Bois is secretly angry with Olivier because there was a war several years prior, and Olivier was captured by the English. Now, Charles believes that he may have turned traitor while he was incarcerated, and that there was an issue about the ransom that was put on his head. Charles felt that it was too low, and that maybe it was put too low because he may have given up information. We don't know if he did or he didn't. What we do know is Charles is angry. So he goes to King Philip IV, and both of these men plot to assassinate Olivier. The way they do this is that they lure him to a friendly tournament. When he arrives at this tournament, he is going to be arrested, tried, and convicted. So this image down at the bottom here shows you his punishment. So her husband is going to be beheaded as a traitor. Now, Jeanne is extremely angry with Charles because she knows he's behind it, but can't prove it. So she decides that she's going to get her revenge. So she is going to pick up her 7 children and she is going to sail to England. Once she gets to England, the money that she has, she purchased a very small fleet of ships. She calls her fleet the Black Fleet, and that's what you see in the bottom corner there. The Black Fleet, which she painted black, but the sails were a bright red color. She wants you to know she's coming. So she is going to take to the seas and she is going up and down the English Channel. She's giving what's called no quarter. In other words, taking no prisoners except leaving one to relay the message. And that's exactly what she does. She sends this messenger to bring word to the French king. Now, you may remember that I mentioned earlier that there is a fine line between being a pirate and being a privateer, depending on what side of the law. It is possible that Jeanne may have been an English privateer when she moved there, so working for the English. And this just gave her an opportunity to take her revenge out on the French. And England and France went back and forth over time, not really liking each other. But what's interesting is her pirate career lasted 13 years. 13 years that she is attacking French vessels. Even after King Philip IV passed, she still continued with her pirating ways. Again, her anger towards the French about what happened to her husband. Eventually, she is going to give up piracy for a married life. She marries a man by the name of Sir Walter Bentley, who was the deputy of King Edward III of England. There is some evidence that we were able to find that in 1343, there's a French document that says that she forfeited her land due to her betrayal of France, and so that the English gave her an income. Then once a truce popped up in 1347, all that land she lost is going to be returned to her. And she dies about 1359. But she was known as the Lioness of Brittany, and Brittany is going to be on the northwestern coast of France there today. Now, this next lady, she is Lady Mary Killigrew. So that right there lets you know she is a woman of wealth, okay? And you can even see that in the image there. Lady Mary Killigrew came from a family of pirates. Her grandfather, her father, one of her husbands was a pirate. But keep in mind, Lady Mary Killigrew. Now, she was born into that pirating family around 1525. As I mentioned, grandfather, father, one of her husbands. It is her second husband whose name Killigrew comes from, Sir Henry Killigrew. By the way, he was also a pirate. And he later is going to turn vice admiral for Queen Elizabeth I. This is interesting because the castle that you see there, this is Arnett House in Cornwallis, is still standing, but that was her pirating operation. She's doing this out of her home. Now, I brought up that she, the word lady, because that is a title that would have been given, and she's a pirate at the same time. So during the day, she was the proper English woman, entertaining the nobility and all the ship captains that came in and out of her home, which means there's lots of information that she's picking up. In the evening time, she is robbing them blind. She is known, and I'm going to try to say this, and I'll clean this up a little bit of how it was written down as for the research. She was known to get everybody drunk and then some did not wake up again, if that makes sense. By the way, her husband was the commissioner for Queen Elizabeth I, who his job was to find pirates and put them in jail. His wife is a pirate, and he did not know. So she's doing this right under his nose. Now, as I mentioned, as a commissioner, he's responsible for investigating suspected pirates. She had redesigned the castle so that any of the treasure, anything that they're taking off the ships, can be put into hidden places. Again, her husband did not know. He does eventually find out because, well, she attacked the wrong ship. She attacked a merchant ship out of the harbor, and the captain went straight to the Queen of England at the time. And so Lady Killigrew was going to be arrested. And then the story is part history, part fantasy, because we don't know. But the story goes that she was sentenced to death, but then pardoned. There's another story that her family is going to bribe the jurors, and then she was acquitted, and that they had been doing this for centuries, for generations. So every time somebody got caught in piracy in her family, they would just bribe people. We're not really sure which one of those stories, but whichever the story is, she was only in jail for a short time. And then eventually she's going to be let go. Again, Lady Mary Killigrew, a lady of proper breeding, as they say, lots of money, but was a pirate right under the nose of her husband, whose job was to investigate those pirates. And she was only captured because she attacked the wrong ship. Now, I also mentioned there were some women who became pirates for patriotic reasons. And that's exactly for this next one. Because again, one person's privateer is another person's pirate. And so this is Serena Bobalena. She is of Greek descent. She was born in a prison in Constantinople, which is Istanbul today, while her mother was visiting her father. So her father was the one in prison. There was a war called the Peloponnesian Revolution that took place in 1769 and lasted until 1770. Now, we don't know what happened to her father because they don't mention him again, so perhaps he may have died in prison. But we do know that Serena and her mother are going to move to the islands of Hydra, as well as Species at the bottom there. And those are two of some of the smaller Greek islands that you could find. Now, Serena loved the sea so much that she also married. She had married twice, and at both times, both of her husbands were sea captains. And upon their death, she is going to accrue all of their money. So quite a wealthy woman at the time, and she did purchase a number of fleets. Now, at this time, you do have the Ottoman Empire that has, with their base out of Constantinople / Istanbul, that is trying to take over large portions of the Middle Eastern area. So they are attacking the Greeks. So as a Greek citizen, she, she has a fleet of 8 ships. One of her largest ships is called the Agamemnon, and she took to raiding Turkish ships during the Greek rebellion. So for the Greeks, she is considered as a citizen, as a privateer. To the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, she is a pirate because she is attacking their ships. Now, what's interesting is that after this battle, she is considered as a national hero. She's one of the first women in Greek history to play a major role in that rebellion. Some say that had it not been for what she did, Greek independence may not have happened at that time. At least that's what some of the historians say. Now, Lascarina died May 22nd, 1825, at that time. Now, a few other queens as we're kind of winding up. This is Syeda Ahora, and she was one of the very few, if not the only, Islamic pirate queen that I could find. Now, Syeda Ahora means the woman sovereign who exercises power. Unfortunately, her real or given name has been lost to history, but she was born in 1485 to a Muslim family living in the Kingdom of Grenada. And Grenada is going to be a part of Spain today. So this is the time where you have a Muslim influence over Spain. They're under Moorish control at that time. Now, her family is going to be kicked out of Spain in 1492. So if that date sounds familiar to anybody, all of those events are going to take place. The Reconquista is taking place, and the Reconquista is where Spain was finally able to kick the Moors out, and they become that power. So you have King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella, who are able to unite that, and eventually Christopher Columbus, as everybody knows the story goes. But Syeda and her family are going to move to Morocco. She gets married to the governor of Tetuan, which is going to be right where you see the yellow arrow there. It's part of Morocco. It's several miles to the southeast of Tangier, Morocco. He actually involved her in politics, which was not uncommon in Moroccan history. She ruled side by side with him, and when her husband passed, she actually took over, and he died in 1515. Now, to protect her land, she's going to reach out to a pirate by the name of Barbarossa, and Barbarossa means Redbeard. And that's usually an image that you see of Barbarossa, and there was two of them, the Barbarossa brothers. So there was one of them that she talked with, and they were of Greek descent. He gave her advice to take to the seas. And because of what happened to our family, she is very angry with those of the Christian faith. So between that advice and between her own hatred of the Spanish, she is going to take to the seas. According to records for the Spanish and the Portuguese who dealt with her, they considered her a legitimate naval threat. For 20 years, she is going to plunder European vessels, took Christian hostages, and any money that she came across, she gave to her people and put it back into the land. She was the main negotiator for the Spanish and French for these hostages. And for what she did for her people, that gave her the title of Ahora. And she is the last person in Moroccan history to hold that title of Ahora. Now, the other part of her story is 1541, the Sultan of Fez. Now, she is on the very northern coast of Morocco. Fez is a little bit towards the center. The Sultan was very taken with her. He had seen paintings that was done of her and was just in awe by her beauty. So much so that he proposed marriage. And she was amenable to that, but she had a couple of conditions. Number one, he had to come to her. It's usually the other way around. She would go to him, but that was her one of her requests. The second was once they got married, she would stay where she was and he would go back to Fez, but they would still be married and they would work jointly. He agreed to both of those conditions. So they got married, which is the only time in Moroccan history that this happened. She stayed there as ruler, but unfortunately that only lasted a year until one of his children is actually not her son, but one of his other children are going to force her out. And again, her story kind of comes to an end. But Syeda Ahora is one of the only Islamic pirate queens that I could find. I just think it's fascinating that that was her conditions, and he was so enamored that he said yes to that. There we go. The Medina of Toubkal is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which means it's protected. It was built into the hill that you see there, and so you can go to parts of Morocco and actually still see this standing. There we go. And I'm sure everybody's heard of Anne Bonny and Mary Read. These two, as I mentioned earlier, are always talked about together. Now, Anne Bonny was born around the turn of the 1700s in Ireland. She was the daughter of a lawyer and one of his domestic servants. His wife found out, and they were, he cut her off financially because of that to please his wife. Now, Anne is going to move with her parents to Charlestown, South Carolina. Charlestown, South Carolina today is Charleston. Her mother is going to die at the age of 12. When she was age of 12, she got married to a small-time pirate by the name of James Bonny. And she had a very fiery temper. And her father did not care too much for James Bonny, so he kicked her out and disowned her. She took her revenge because she burned her father's house down. She burned down his house. She later is going to move with her husband to Nassau in the Bahamas, where they are going to meet another pirate by the name of John Calico Jack Rackham. Calico Jack gets his name because of all the colorful patches that he wore on his clothing. And she wanted to go out to sea. Her husband said no. She left anyway. So this was a woman who knew her own heart. She took to the seas, and while she was aboard Calico Jack's ship, she did dress as a man. And then there is another pirate that comes on board by the name of Mary Read. She was born in 1695 in St. Catharines, Jamaica. The mother had gotten married and had a son. The son had passed away very early, but she was still getting money from her mother, and she wanted to keep that rolling in. So for Mary, her hair was cut very short, and she was dressed as a young boy to keep that money going. She's going to join the military as a soldier. She meets another soldier and reveals herself as a woman. They get married. He passes away. She heads back out to sea. This time, she is dressed completely as a male sailor, and she happens to be aboard Calico Jack Rackham's ship. As he's on board, one of those sailors is going to fall in love. This sailor happens to be Anne Bonny, and when they both realize that they are both women, they go and tell Calico Jack. And for the rest of the time, they do stay with Calico Jack. They are dressed as you see them in the image here. So sometimes they were dressed in dresses. A lot of times they had on shorter jackets or dresses with trousers underneath. Now, eventually this crew is going to steal a ship somewhere into the Bahamas, and the men were found down below in the decks, and they had been drinking heavily. Well, at this time, this is where the English Navy had been chasing after them as well, and a fight's going to ensue. Keeping in mind that the men are in no shape to be fighting. So it is Anne Bonny and Mary Read who begin fighting these other sailors as they're coming on board. Eventually, they're going to be overpowered. Everybody on board is going to be arrested, tried, and convicted for the crime of piracy. And this is where a couple of things happen. So in November 1720, as we mentioned, the men are going to be tried, convicted, and hanged. Before Calico Jack's hanging, it is said that he was visited by Mary. And Mary is quoted as saying, "Had you fought like a man, you would not be dying like a dog." Just as Calico Jack is going to be found guilty and he is going to be executed for his crime, the two women are also going to be found guilty, but the court records, which were kept for both of their trials, mentions that the ladies, and I'm quoting this, pleaded with their belly. In other words, they said that they were with child. But unlike today, it was not as a thorough test that you could take to find this out. So the women were taken at their word. We do know at least one of them that was true. We're not sure about the other one. But we do know that Mary does die in prison. One of them gives birth to a child in prison. And unfortunately, we don't know really what happened to her. We don't know if she was let out of prison or not. But both of these ladies, as I mentioned, are talked about. There's quite a few songs out there about both of these women and also individually as well. Two more pirate queens. A lot of people may know about Grace O'Malley, who was an Irish pirate queen, and it was said that as a child, she would cut her hair short and she would head to the seas. She later is going to get married to Donald of the Battle. He was killed in a battle, unfortunately. She is going to take over, and she has her castle. It was originally called Hen's Castle because she was the hen taking care of it, but eventually it's going to get changed to Rockfleet Castle, which is still standing. Now, she does get married for a second time. She marries a man by the name of Richard Burke, and they go back and forth as a pirate couple. But one day she just, for whatever reason, decided she is tired of getting married. And at this time, it was very easy for her to dissolve her marriage. She waited till her husband left, closed the gate to the castle, went all the way up to the top, yelled out, "I dismiss you." And they were divorced. Simple as that. It didn't last long. Eventually, they get back together and they continue raiding the land. She does get captured in 1577. She's in jail for about 18 months, and then she is let go when her husband negotiates for his surrender during a rebellion. But that did not stop her from attacking English vessels. She continued. We do know that at one point she is invited to meet with Queen Elizabeth I. This is the only image we were able to find of this meeting because it wasn't really written down. So we don't know what was said between the two women at that time, but you could probably imagine that the Queen may just be a little bit curious about this woman who is headed out to seas and has been doing very, very well. Over time, she eventually gives up piracy. Her son is going to become a viscount at that time. We also have the English conquering Ireland, and in 1603, Grace O'Malley joined others in infamy when she died at her home. It is said that she was buried at Clare Island beside the sea that she loved so much. And there's tons of songs about Grace O'Malley as well that you can find. And finally, our last pirate queen is one that historians and scholars say may have been one of the most successful pirates of all time. This is Chen Yisao, and piracy is very well known throughout Asia and parts of the West. It was one of the world's oldest professions, and it was not uncommon aboard Chinese ships to see women. So when other cultures where women aboard ship were considered as bad luck, it was not so in Asian history. Now, she was roughly born around 1775, and little is known of her life prior to 1801. In 1801, she was in another of the world's oldest professions. She was aboard a Chinese vessel. So up at the top here is a model of what's called a Chinese flower pleasure boat. And if you think about that, that'll let you know what her profession was. But that was until she got married just a year later. She married a man by the name of Chen Yi, and between the two of them, they became a powerhouse in their pirate confederacy. The Confederation at that time outnumbered that of the Spanish Armada. During that time, under their control, they had about 70,000 pirates and close to about 1,500 vessels. She was able to organize all of the ships into various colors. There were about 6 of them. She was in charge of the largest, which was the Red Squadron. Her husband dies in 1807. She solidifies power as the final voice. Now, the pirates are able to attack ships, but all of the money and treasure must come directly to her. It's going to be recorded, and then it will be divvied out. And she was very strict if you broke any of her rules. For example, if you were caught giving commands on your own or disobeying a direct order, decapitation was the corporal punishment. In others, you may lose a hand or an arm. She was the sole voice when it came to business. Now, in 1809, she's going to be considered as a threat by the Chinese government, so much so that they decided to change tactics a little bit. They are actually going to offer amnesty. Now, she saw this as an opportunity to save her pirate confederation from any more attacks or fights, because many of her pirates had families that were along with them. So she is going to negotiate peace, not just for herself, but for every single pirate in her confederacy. She went to the government unarmed and accompanied by a number of women and children. So she played a tactic. And this happened on April 10, 1810. She was able to get universal amnesty for everyone. They also got to keep any proceeds from their time of piracy. So anything that was in their possession, they got to keep. And she was able to find the men jobs within the Chinese military. So she was very, very good. We do know that she later is going to open up a gambling house after she gives up piracy. She has 2 children. She did get married again, but her husband died at sea. She eventually moved her family to Macau, where she opened up another gambling house. And in 1844, she died in bed surrounded by her family at the age of 69. Now, Chen Yisao also pops up in a number of different movies as well. If you are familiar with the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, the 3rd one, which is At the World's End, she makes an appearance when they're sitting around the table and they're trying to figure out who's going to be the pirate king. If you remember an older Asian woman who was sitting at the table, that is Chen Yisao. That's who they were referring to with that. Again, there are many stories about pirate queens. Many of them went to sea as pirates for a number of different reasons. For sheer adventure, for taking care of their family, some of them out of sheer revenge. But despite all that, these women are feminine and fierce. And these are some of our pirate queens that roamed the seven seas. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Very welcome. We're hoping that as we continue to do research, there may be other pirate queens, because we know in the world today there's still piracy. So there could be some female pirates out there that are leading it. We don't know, but we will always do our research and find and see what we can find. So, but if you all have any questions, please feel free to ask.
That was really interesting, especially the one that went right under her husband's nose. I mean, that was great.
When I came
And
across
his job, it's like,
when I came across that, I was in the middle of our office and I just started laughing out loud, and everybody's like, "What is this?" I'm like, "You guys got to hear this." And they were just like, "Wait, she did what?" And we're like, "Yeah, how did he not know?" But he didn't. It's amazing that he had no idea.
so is the museum gonna do like a piece on this where you actually could go and see
So we've
things
had
with that?
a pirate exhibit before, and some of the things that we're doing now is, especially during the summertime when a lot of people are out of school and on weekends, you will find staff in the galleries, and we've pulled out additional items that we can show that are not always out on display.
Okay.
Some of the items that I showed in the presentation, like the bi-ring and the tri-ring, those are all out on display. The Chinese pleasure boat is not, but those are things that as people have requested to see things, or we just are in a gallery and we'll talk about those different things. But sometimes we have events, evening events, where we'll pull out some of those objects, because we have a lot. We have a quite a large collection of miniature models, other artifacts. There's documents that we have a ridiculous amount, and I say ridiculous in a good way,
Right.
but a ridiculous amount of maritime paintings and everything. So if you're looking for it, we may have it. So, but feel free to go to the website for the Mariners Museums. It's marinersmuseum.org, and you can look on our catalog of the artifacts and actually see those items. And then you can always ask when you come to the museum as well. We're only $1. So if you get an opportunity, definitely come in for a visit.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
We've also got some folks thanking you from online. Julianne says thank you from London, UK.
Wonderful.
Felicia Kay says thank you. We got a good variety of online folks today. so-
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you all so much, and we hope that you'll come to the Hampton Library's website and see what other presentations and programs that they'll have going on through the months.
Well, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.